Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Animal Law Academy. My name is Megan, and I am one of our events associates. Today, we will be discussing passing local legislation, prohibiting animals in circuses and traveling shows. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. This webinar does offer closed captioning. If you'd like to turn it on, you can click the caret icon next to the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. Joining us today are Campaigns Manager Matt Rossell and Campaigner Abbey Benesh. As Campaigns Manager, Matt inspires and engages our supporters to participate in Animal Legal Defense Fund's work and increases our success throughout the organization. Abbey is responsible for increasing supporter engagement through outreach, relationship development and management, and drafting campaign-related content. Thank you both for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. I'll pass it over to you and see everybody back here for the Q&A after the presentation.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited. My name is Matt Rossell, and Abbey and I are really excited to have this opportunity to share details with you about how to protect animals in your community and pass local legislation. And before we get into it, here's a bit about what you can expect from today's webinar. First, we're going to start with why local legislation. We're going to talk about the cruelty and safety issues that are associated with circuses and traveling shows. We're going to go over some of the existing laws that are currently in place to protect these animals. And we're going to talk about advocating for a ban in your city or county and how to work with legislators and how to protect animals using grassroots advocacy. So getting right into it, we're going to start off with a question for you. Have you ever volunteered on a campaign to help animals in circuses? And we'll give you a few minutes or a minute or so to answer the question. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we're going to move right along. So thanks, Abbey. I'm going to start with a personal story about why this issue is so close to my heart. I actually worked undercover for a month on the road with Walker Brothers Circus, and we were following two female Asian elephants named Loda and Liz, who were leased from a large herd, as most animal acts in circuses are leased just for the season to each circus. All the other elephants from this herd had already been taken off the road because of an outbreak of tuberculosis. And these were the last two elephants still on the road from that group, despite the likelihood that they both were sick with TB. Loda especially was showing outward signs of TB. She was thin. She just seemed exhausted, laying down during the day, which is really not typical elephant behavior. And tuberculosis is zoonotic, which means it's transmissible between people and animals. So the fact that they were still putting kids on the backs of these elephants, forcing them to perform every day, was recklessly dangerous, both for the elephants and for the public. And while I was there, I did witness Liz suffer a severe elephant beating by Johnny Walker Jr., who was the elephant handler on the show, and he was also the circus owner's son. He had a really bad temper. Basically, everyone on the show was afraid of him, and I would say especially the elephants. And I'll never forget her screams and the sound of the bullhook hitting her body as it echoed across the fairgrounds that night. The organization that I was working for at the time was calling local and state authorities at every stop along the route to try to get someone to inspect and intervene on behalf of these elephants. This went on for a few weeks as we traveled through the South, through multiple Southern states, each day to a new location. And finally, the elephants were stopped at the Florida border, and the circus was forced to take them off the road. The bear act that I witnessed in that show was also a tragic situation. The bears spent long days stressed, pacing, bored in tiny cages, except for the few minutes that they were performing. And I'll never forget how desperate these bears were for any kind of stimulation. So night after night, they would go through the motions of the act. They knew the act so well, but all the while you could just see that all the while that they were in the ring, you could just see that they were like straining their necks, trying to sniff the air, just trying to take in any new smell or experience some tiny bit of satisfaction from this moment they had out of their jail cell. It was absolutely heartbreaking. And on the public safety front, one night, one of the parts of the Bear Act was the bears were forced to ride a motorcycle that was set on a course that was just supposed to do little circles inside the ring. But one night it was set up incorrectly and the motorcycle went off course and it veered into the stands and crashed. And luckily the bears jumped into the ring instead of into the crowd because there was absolutely no barrier protecting the audience from the bears. And it was such a close call that the motorcycle actually popped a child's balloon in the front row. And this is just one of the extensive list of incidents that never get reported, never get documented, as was the case that night. But news stories over the years do chronicle animal escapes and attacks from circuses that have harmed and even killed circus workers and patrons. And one such headline happened on August 5th, 2015 in Lancaster, New Hampshire, when the Walker Brothers Circus tent collapsed in a storm during a performance. A father and his young daughter were killed, and dozens of other audience members were injured that night. And the reports detailed how the circus didn't have the legally required permits to even set up the tent. And this may actually have been the last time Walker Brothers Circus ever performed. And so I tell you this story to drive home the point of why local legislation is so important. And Abby, you can go ahead and switch slides. Local legislation protects animals and people in your community. Bottom line, if you can pass a local ordinance, you're protecting the animals and the public. And it also sets an example for other jurisdictions to follow. Passing local laws is often a step towards passing similar state and even federal laws. Local ordinances help build momentum for other laws to pass. Here in California, where I live, Huntington Beach, Roanoke Park, West Hollywood, San Francisco, they all passed a local ban before, and which set the stage for the state of California to pass a statewide ban in 2019. Local laws also create a financial incentive for circuses to shift to humane, non-animal models. The best example of this, and the biggest example, of course, is Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. After taking their show off the road in 2017, amid lots of ongoing complaints and documented violations of law and harm to animals, they're now coming back this year with a redesigned show with only human performers. Circus Vargas got rid of their animal acts back in 2010 and never looked back. And if you really consider it and look at any circus that uses animals, the amount of their overall show that involves animal acts is really a small portion of the overall show. They're mostly human performers already, even the ones that have animals. So by replacing a few animal acts with human performers, these shows can easily all adjust to a humane business model. So let's get into the facts about what's wrong with using animals in circuses. Circuses and other traveling acts are circuses and other traveling shows that use animals are inherently cruel, and they pose a serious and documented risk to public safety. It's simply impossible to meet the complex needs of wild animals while on a show that is traveling often for months on end. Wild animals must live in cages that can be transported on trucks and trailers or in train cars. So you have a tiger, for example, who in the wild occupies a territory that spans dozens, if not hundreds of square miles. In the circus, they often only have enough room to turn around in a cage that's barely longer than their body. Elephants who roam miles a day in the wild, interacting in complex social families. In the circus, they're suffering and swaying back and forth behind temporary electric fences or chained by one or more legs 24/7. Speaking in these terms about the inherent cruelty, about the inherent problems, helps eliminate the false debates that legislators and others will try to engage on regarding, well, is this humane? Is this circus humane? Is this circus not humane? No matter how high or relatively low the number of USDA violations a circus has, or whatever their claims of humane care and training, it is always true that these animals are unacceptably suffering from the restrictive confinement, the lack of exercise, the limited social interaction, and the enrichment deficits that are inherent to every traveling exhibition. So let's talk a little bit more about how these animals are trained. Balancing on stools, jumping through hoops of fire, riding a motorcycle, these are not natural behaviors for elephants, tigers, and bears. Animals perform these tricks out of a combination of reward and the always present fear of punishment. And investigations around the world, past and present, reveal a pattern of physical violence that is inherent in circus-style training. Bullhooks, whips, and electric shocking devices are the tools of this industry. Domination of these animals start when the animals are babies and they're taken away from their mothers. And it's important to point out, these are domestic, they're wild, dangerous animals in close proximity to the public. And so because of that, and because there is often no barrier protecting the public, the trainers use fear of weapons to maintain control because they absolutely have to be in control at all times. You know, we've heard the stories about an elephant running amok or a tiger escaping. Like they're dominating these animals in order to basically protect the audience. And when treats are used in training, it's often in combination with food and water deprivation to increase the animal's motivation to do these unnatural and often physically painful or stressful tricks. So I want to just point out before we leave the slide this picture, because you see here, this is a picture of a ringling trainer with elephants before a performance. And it's hardly noticeable, but tucked under this trainer's arm is a bullhook. They're often disguised, they're painted to look like this one is very dark black in the same color as the trainer's costume. And so they do a good job of hiding these weapons in plain sight, but the elephants know better. They know that weapon is there, and they remember distinctly the last time it was used on them violently. And that is how they keep the animals in line. And circuses are not just bad for the animals. So we're going to talk a little bit more about, no matter how much regulation is in place, there's no way to ensure public safety when wild, dangerous, and unpredictable animals are exhibited in a traveling performance. Shows typically rely on collapsible, temporary, mobile equipment that are unable to consistently contain large, dangerous animals. There's numerous incidents of animals escaping and injuring and even killing people. Camels and elephants, for example, can become spooked and take off, sometimes with children still on their backs. Small animals also pose risks, like monkeys, for example, have been known to bite circus patrons, and a lot of these same monkey species carry a form of simian herpes virus that can be deadly to people. And as I mentioned with Loda and Liz, elephants can carry tuberculosis, which is also transmittable to people. And you can see pictured here 2 zebras running amok in the streets of Philadelphia after escaping from Universal Circus. And the other picture here is the tragic story of Tyke. Tyke was an elephant that was performing in Hawaii and was shot 87 times while running loose in the streets of Honolulu after killing her trainer and injuring her groomer. And this is really a good point to make if you're working on legislation and talking to lawmakers or council members. Ask them if their local law enforcement are prepared and have the firepower on hand to take down like a 2-ton rampaging elephant. Or what would they do to dispatch a lion running through a crowd of panicked circus patrons? These are the things that really make cities think twice about the liability that they might be taking on by allowing these dangerous acts into their community. And Congress has recently passed the Big Cat Public Safety Act. You likely heard about this law, which prohibits private ownership of big cats and prohibits exhibitors from allowing public contact, including cub petting. Now, far more dangerous are these mobile, non-permanent circus traveling exhibitions than a permanent facility in terms of these same dangers. And so it really is time to pass the Traveling Exotic Animal and Public Safety Protection Act. This is a federal bill. It's been introduced multiple times in Congress, and this would ban wild animals from traveling circuses and shows across the country. So I strongly encourage you, if you have a chance to support this legislation when it gets reintroduced, to please do so. And so speaking of laws, we're going to move on to the next slide. Exhibitors must be licensed under the Animal Welfare Act, or the AWA. Now, the USDA is responsible for inspecting these facilities to ensure they are complying with the very minimal standards set by the AWA. The problem is, the weak provisions merely set minimal standards of housing, food, and sanitation, and they're inadequate to meet the needs of the animals in the circus. The USDA is chronically understaffed, and circuses are moving targets most of the time. So it makes a surprise inspection very difficult for USDA inspectors. And they already are visiting each circus as little as 1 time out of the entire year. And even so, when a violation is documented, the USDA may only issue a warning. And even if they do issue a minor fine, for these exhibitors, fines are often just considered a cost of doing business, or they may not take any action at all. Exhibitors rarely lose their licenses. And all of this to say the USDA really lacks the staff and often the motivation to adequately enforce the already weak provisions of the Animal Welfare Act. So this brings us to a little bit of audience participation. We have another poll question. Do you live in a city or state with a circus ban? Yes, no, or not yet? And we'll give you a little bit of time here to answer the question. Okay, it looks like our poll is concluded. I don't see the results, but I'm hoping, oh, there we go. Okay. So it looks like somewhere around 50-50, 40% do live in an area with a circus band, and those of you who don't. So that's something that we can work on. And for those of you who may have already worked on an ordinance, thank you for your work on that. And so we're going to move on. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some state laws that are already in effect. There are 4 states with a complete ban on using wild animals in circuses. That is New Jersey, which bans the use of wild animals in traveling acts. Hawaii as well, both of those passed in 2018. With Hawaii, it wasn't legislation, it was actually a policy change that just banned the importation of wild animals in traveling shows. And because none exist in permanent facilities on the islands, that was a way to make that work in Hawaii. And then California in 2019 also passed a ban that also includes all animals except dogs, cats, domesticated horses. And in Colorado in 2021, the law bans the use of certain wild animals, including big cats, bears, non-human primates, and elephants from traveling shows. And there are a few more states to mention that have banned that have passed bans that impact animals used in circuses without placing a complete ban on the state. And some examples are New York and Illinois. Both have banned the use of elephants in traveling acts. Rhode Island is interesting. They have not banned elephants, but they have outlawed the use of bullhooks. And so because there's really no way to handle an elephant in what's called free contact. Free contact is just whenever the handler is sharing the same unprotected space with the elephant. In free contact, a bullhook is always present. The weapon, as we mentioned, has to be present to control the animal and dominate the elephant. And so by banning bullhooks, it's a de facto ban on the use of elephants in that way. And then most recently in 2022, Kentucky banned the use of both endangered species in circuses and exotic animals in county fairs, including a ban on elephant rides. And in addition to these state bans, more than 150 cities and counties across 37 different states have restricted or banned the use of wild animals in circuses and traveling shows as well. This list includes Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, and Cincinnati, just to name a few. And now, for those of you who don't already have one in your community, Abby is going to talk about how to add your city to that list. So take it away, Abby.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks so much for being here with us today. My name is Abbey Benesh. I'm a licensed attorney and a campaign here at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. As Matt mentioned, I'm going to talk more about the process of actually passing a local circus ban in your community now that we know more about the issue itself. So when it comes to local legislation, there are a few things to consider. First, getting the support of your legislators through citizen lobbying is basically getting your foot in the legislative door, so to speak. And then the second piece of the puzzle is grassroots advocacy. This basically involves rallying your community and getting people involved in the issue, and we're going to talk more in depth about each of these. Okay, so first up is citizen lobbying. The first thing you're going to want to do is find a sponsor for your bill. The sponsor is basically the legislator who's going to introduce the ordinance and then move it forward in the formal political process. Once introduced, that ordinance will become that council member's issue, at which point they have a personal stake in that ordinance. It's really important for you to do your homework when you're searching for an animal-friendly sponsor. You can review pieces of past legislation they've supported, or you can attend a council or town hall meeting to figure out what their priorities are. When you figure out who to ask, you will then need to email or call their office to request a meeting to present your proposal. So one thing to note here is that you may get invited to meet with a member of the council member's staff as opposed to the actual council member. Try not to be put off by this. It's really common at all levels of government, and you should trust that if you're making a good impression and a convincing argument, that information will then be relayed to the council member. The staff are the people who are working behind the scenes and have the most contact and influence over legislators, so it's important to build solid relationships with them as well as the legislator. Okay, so you've secured your meeting, and now it's time to start preparing for a successful meeting. You'll want to dress appropriately for a business meeting and be prepared with a clear, concise summary of the problem, and you're going to offer a solution. So you want to have a direct ask, which is what you're asking the legislator to do. In this case, it's to sponsor your legislation. So you may want to have sample language of ordinances which have already passed in other communities to show as an example. Often legislators are more willing to put something together or move something forward knowing other communities have already done so, especially communities in your state or communities that may be similarly situated. So think of big city, small town, that kind of thing. You'll also want to bring a fact sheet and an FAQ sheet. A fact sheet is a one-sided, really simple and direct page that is used to communicate your main points, whereas an FAQ is a little longer than your fact sheet and can be used in anticipation of the arguments that your opponents will make. You'll want to cite your sources to establish credibility. And we have a bunch of fact sheets and FAQ sheets on our website, and we just want to point you in the direction of those. They're there for you. Please take advantage of them. There is also one specifically for circus bands, so be sure to use that. Also consider using non-animal arguments. So for example, for a circus band, you can emphasize the importance of these laws for public safety, like Matt talked about. And lastly, you'll have an opportunity to tell your story and connect it back to how this proposed legislation can help your community. So come prepared with some personal anecdotes. I guess one of the most important things I can say about these meetings is to remain positive and professional, even with and really when you're being challenged. Be sure to listen, take good notes, and consider all the advice that you're receiving along the way. When you're treating everyone with respect and showing an earnest desire to fix this animal protection issue, and you're expressing interest to work with and not against the elected body, doors are going to open for you. During all of this too, it's important to note that you may get asked a question that you're not sure the answer to. It's totally okay and a great opportunity for you actually to follow up with the legislator afterwards. So just say something like, great question, I'm not quite sure, but I'll look into it and I can get back to you after this meeting. Before we move any further, I just want to touch on the actual legislative process generally. This process is different in every jurisdiction, but there are some general similarities that we can briefly discuss. So first, the ordinance is introduced to the council or the commission or the assembly or the board or chamber or whatever your jurisdiction calls it, then drafted into language that fits the local municipal code. It's reviewed by committee usually, and then ends up in front of the full council for a vote. Again, the details in every jurisdiction are a bit different, but you can see it's a multi-step, long-term process that will likely take months and possibly even years to accomplish. The good news is there's often downtime between all these steps, and you don't have to necessarily be working on it continuously this whole time. It'll look more like periods of intense attention, followed by periods of monitoring and kind of waiting around for the next step to be put on the schedule. You don't have to commit to anything right away either. You can start with a meeting or two with council offices just to check for interest, and then you can take it one step at a time. Research how the process works by attending some council meetings and then paying attention to how legislation moves. During all of this, your sponsoring legislator and their staff are going to be obviously well-versed in the process and a great resource should you have any questions moving forward. And Matt and I are here for you. So in addition to citizen lobbying, grassroots activism will be hugely helpful for you throughout this whole process. Grassroots advocacy is basically just getting a broad base of community members to engage in the political process. So if you're part of the Animal Legal Defense Fund's mailing list, you'll probably have gotten involved in some sort of grassroots work, either by signing a petition or writing to your legislator and things like that. Basically, these small actions are like a vote, and each individual small action collectively with the dozens or hundreds of others shows lawmakers that there is in fact wide support in favor of the ordinance. This type of action is absolutely essential and can ultimately lead to the passage or defeat of a bill. There are three main tools that we use in grassroots activism. That is action alerts, social media, and public testimony, and we're going to break down each of these. Okay, so first up, action alerts. Action alerts are a message to your supporters asking them to take a specific action. So these actions are usually something like emailing or calling the legislator to discuss a specific issue. We often send these out to supporters when a proposed ordinance or bill is scheduled for a committee hearing or floor vote, and it applies pressure from constituents to legislators. The keys for action alerts are to keep the message short, specific, and easy for people to do. It's really helpful to include a sample email message or a sample script if you're looking for people to make a phone call. One of the biggest things you want to be mindful of is only encouraging people to reach out if they live in the appropriate jurisdiction. Legislators have a responsibility to their constituents and will prioritize them over others. So the last thing you want to do is frustrate a legislator with an overwhelming amount of messages from people outside of their jurisdiction. One of the most common but daunting vehicles for grassroots advocacy is social media. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and whatever else there is can be extremely effective to engage with people on local ordinance campaigns and reach new supporters. You should be sharing the action alerts on your social media pages. I know Facebook has an event feature where you can invite people to attend a hearing or council meeting, for example. And as always, it's important to be kind and address differences in opposition. People will be looking to see how you react to different comments, and your response may set the example for others. It can be especially tricky, but on social media, you still want to be sure that people are only contacting legislators within their jurisdiction. The final tool for grassroots advocacy that we're going to talk about is public testimony. At various stages, as your ordinance progresses through the process, whether it be at city council meetings or at committee hearings, there will be opportunities for public comment on proposed legislation. So testifying presents the best opportunity for community members to speak directly to legislators and give their opinion on a particular issue. When preparing to testify, you'll have about 2 to 3 minutes usually, and you want to have that amount of testimony prepared, though it's not uncommon to have this time shortened, so don't be shocked if you get cut off. For this reason, I find it useful to also have maybe a 1-minute version ready to go in case you know ahead of time that the time is actually going to be shorter than 2 to 3 minutes, so you're not especially flustered when you're up there. And always be sure to thank the legislators for their time and to introduce yourself for the record. So that was grassroots advocacy, and now we can talk about Grasstops advocacy. Grasstops advocacy is a term that describes an individual who has extra influence to mobilize supporters or convince legislators to support your ordinance. For example, our organization has turned to people like Billie Eilish and Joaquin Phoenix. They were among a group of celebrities who added their voice to a letter supporting a ban in New York City on horse-drawn carriages, and this was after a horse named Ryder had collapsed in downtown Manhattan. This letter was picked up by the media and created news stories that obviously furthered the cause. And we don't expect you to be able to recruit the help of mainstream celebrities, but maybe someone within your circle is friends with the mayor or a local celebrity or a prominent business owner. These are the high-profile people that can play a significant role when used effectively during the campaign, often to do a specific thing, such as take a meeting with a legislator who may be on your fence, or sign a letter or an op-ed that gets published in the local paper. It's important to ask everyone you're working with to consider who they know who might be able to play this role as a Grasstops advocate. And we have our last poll question really quick. So the question is, after participating in this webinar, how likely are you to work in your community on a local ordinance? And I'll give you a little bit to answer that. All right, thanks everyone. Amazing. It looks like most people are getting there. They're either ready or they just need some more information to get there. Either way, Matt and I are absolutely here to help you guys. Basically, we couldn't do this without you, and you're essential to this process. Here is Matt and I's contact information if you need anything or any support throughout this process. And I think we do have some time for some questions and answers. And just again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Excellent, great information. So we are opening up for the Q&A. If you do have any questions, you can use that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and go ahead and submit them. And we do have a few that have already come in. So our first question, When the circus comes to town, should citizens document possible violations of the Animal Welfare Act? And if we find something, how would we report it?
That's a very good question. And yes, the answer is definitely you should. If you are, oftentimes there are advocates that attend outreach events outside the circus to try to dissuade people or educate the public on these issues. And when you're there, there's a lot of times that you might have access to, even from a public sidewalk, to see the animals, and you might have a chance to take photos or video from, a public sidewalk where you're absolutely not violating any laws. I would say two things. One, report it to your local jurisdiction, wherever you live. Look up who is the local animal control. In your jurisdiction, it could even be the local police or sheriff, depending on how big or small your community is. But whoever enforces animal cruelty laws in your community, I would report to them. But you can also report to the USDA, and there are a few different ways to do that. If you simply Google, how do I report a circus violation to the USDA, it will take you to a website that, or with a little bit of searching, you can find the USDA actually has a portal where they have a way that you can just file a complaint. But there's also specifically a East and West regional office of the USDA, and depending on which half of that, like, you can easily look this up and find out which regional office your state falls under. You can report there. And then there's also 4 local offices that are under the USDA or APHIS animal care. And all of this is readily available with a little bit of Google searching, and any of those options are valid.
Excellent. We now have someone who has a little bit of an experience with local campaigning, and they're curious in how you would help grow a list of people to send action alerts out to.
That's a really good question. Hopefully, as a part of a campaign, you're going to be constantly working in the community to find other stakeholders that share your interest in protecting these animals. So as a part of your campaign, you're going to be reaching out to local rescues. Maybe there's some local animal organizations. All of these other groups that you work with will already have lists of supporters that they can send alerts out to. And so you can communicate with them when you want to share information. But really what you're going to be doing is everyone you meet along the path of working on this ordinance, whether maybe you're organizing a circus protest, make sure you talk to every single person who attends and get all their contact details, because these are going to be the people that are going to support your efforts. So you're growing that list as you go along, and you're networking with other interested people in the community. And so that list will grow over time.
Now, what do you think about using some of the information that you've shared today with some of the other industries that exploit animals, such as rodeos?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of similarities and overlap between the abuses of animals in rodeos and the abuses of animals in circuses. In some ways, the circus is trying to take a wild animal and control their behavior using weapons. In the rodeo, they're taking docile animals and trying to make them wild using weapons. But there's really a lot of similarities with the two. Plus, the travel is very similar. And a lot of the information that we have researched about what causes stress to exotic animals in traveling shows really came from evidence that we gathered through, because there's much more data on farmed animals traveling across the country and the stress that is involved in that. So, and of course, all the information about passing a local ordinance is applicable to any animal issue, rodeos, circuses. If you're trying to pass any kind of local animal protection ordinance, all of these steps are very similar.
So here, one of our guests, it's a little long. So I'm currently in talks with 2 city councils in my area about enacting bans on traveling exhibits with wild and exotic animals. And we have sponsors in both cities and are waiting for legislation to be written. I want to add all animals to the ban. How have some cities dealt with pushback about certain animals like camels or horses or ponies?
That's a really good question. I would say overall, when you look at all the local ordinances that have passed across the country, most of them are for wild animals. I think it's a little bit easier to educate or convince an elected body because there is this added issue of public safety that is not as big of an issue if you're talking about, a poodle act or a pony in a traveling show. However, it's very clear from the evidence from investigations across the country, across the world, that domestic animals in traveling shows are also suffering. I'll never forget, there was a poodle act at Walker Brothers Circus when I was there, and I felt so sorry for those poor dogs. The trainer was abusive to the dogs. They lived their life in tiny crates. They got out in a tiny little wire X pen for just a few minutes, a couple times a day to potty. Their whole lives were just in these crates. They were treated as objects, and the only time they really got out of that situation was during the act. And so there's definitely plenty of evidence to support the need for banning domestic animals as well. But I think that the way to go about it, and this is kind of another sort of just good practice whenever you're trying to introduce any kind of ordinance, is really ask for more than what you're willing to settle with. It's always easier to walk backwards, to have to make a concession and take something away, than it is to add it later. So if you're negotiating or talking or educating a lawmaker, always try to start with all animals. It gives you a point of concession if you need to say, well, okay, we'll concede on this, because there's a lot of compromise that goes along with politics. But we can definitely talk offline if you want to reach out to us about more specific questions about any details that you're facing on your struggles with that particular campaign. We'd be happy to talk to you more about it later.
So here's a question for a little clarification on the Animal Welfare Act. Someone asking, is this just a federal act, or is there anything local when it comes to the Animal Welfare Act?
The Animal Welfare Act is a federal law, and it doesn't preclude your local city. It usually doesn't. I mean, unless it's specifically written into your local laws as an exemption. You can also report cruelty as they apply to your cruelty statutes. So they're separate. The Animal Welfare Act is a federal law that's enforced by the a division of the United States Department of Agriculture called APHIS. And then your local cruelty statutes are regulated at the local level through your local animal control or whatnot.
Okay, we have time for 2 more. This first one can be a tough one, and this is something I think we all within this community face, but how do you deal with the emotions and sometimes anger that comes up when doing such work?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, of course, when you see what's happening to animals and you're aware of it, it's so obvious, right? The cruelty to circus animals, the cruelty on fur farms or puppy mills. Why is it so hard to change these practices? I can share personally, I get depressed, I get angry. My feeling about it is, how do we channel that anger? How do we channel that into actions that actually make a difference? Because the animals don't benefit from us being sad. And I know it's hard. I mean, I don't want to dismiss it. I really believe that we all have to take care of ourselves first and foremost before we can help others. So, any way that you can support yourself in, having friends that you can talk to, building community. I feel like other people that are advocates can help. We can rely on each other to kind of listen, and sometimes you just have to regroup and take some time off and step back and come back to it if you're feeling burned out. I mean, we could do a whole webinar, and then some, just dealing with burnout and dealing with all these issues of the emotions that we suffer, because yeah, when you're aware of this cruelty, it's overwhelming. But I stick with it because the animals need us and we have to be there for them.
And then the last question for today. I would like to work on an ordinance in my community, but I don't know enough people to feel comfortable. How do I find more support?
That's a really great question. And I mentioned it a little bit before. Part of it is just doing your homework and looking around to see, there's got to be someone out there, whether it's a rescue group or another animal group, even through your Facebook friends or your friend group, find like-minded people and start working with them. A lot of organizing is happening online now, and there are online communities where you can reach out to that are local. But also rely on us, because we're here. Our interest in the work that you can do locally doesn't end at the end of this webinar. We are going to be here for you, and you can see write down our email addresses, reach out to us if you have questions along the way. Other national groups might be willing to support you as well. Find other local groups, just build some community and find other people. But then, having said that, I will also say that it's always a small group of people that pull these things off. You're going to find the small handful of people that you're going to work with that are going to be so dedicated like you are, that are going to work on this issue from beginning to end and get it across the finish line and pass a local ordinance. And it really is surprising how, maybe not how easy it is, but how it only takes a few people who are really focused and dedicated to make it happen. So, and we're here for you. So please reach out. And thanks so much for everyone taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, great feedback. So thank you, Matt and Abby, for spending time with us today. And thank you to everybody else out there for joining us and having such a great conversation. You will be able to view a recording of this webinar along with past webinars on our website at www.aldf.org/webinars. If we did not get to your question, please feel free to send us an email either directly to either one of our speakers or to events@aldf.org, and we will make sure to get back to you. You can save the date for our next webinar on Wednesday, July 12th, which will be a mid-year review from our Legislative Affairs program. And we do encourage you to take the survey that will pop up on your screen to help us in future planning. You might need to click on a blue continue button to access it. We appreciate your ongoing support for the animals and hope that you have a great remainder of your day. And thank you for all the support. We truly couldn't do it without each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.